Hello, everybody. Oh, this is what we're going to need. We're going to need some audience participation later on, so get your voices going. Okay, so we are all just cavemen and women, or cave women, I should say, living in a world of numbers, and it isn't easy. So welcome to How to Lie with Statistics with me, your host, David Sigerson. This is Peckham Rock. This is one of the earliest pieces by the protest artist Banksy. He hung it in the British Museum for about 3 days before anybody noticed it wasn't a real exhibit. And it represents the two main themes of today's presentation, that we're modern cave people and that actually creating a hoax is incredibly easy to do. By the end of this session, I want you to be able to spot a hoax, or something misleading, or perhaps too good to be true, and basically have you more engaged with the many numbers that surround us. So who am I? Well, I'm a solutions consultant with Tableau. I've been here nearly 4 years, and I'm originally from a place called Dudley in the West Midlands, in obviously the United Kingdom. Why am I here? Well, my boss said to me, you should do a presentation on lying with statistics. You'd be really good at it. And I don't know about you, but when managers say that kind of thing, I'm thinking one of two things. Either I'm an expert in lying, or I'm an expert in statistics. I'd like to think it's the latter, but I have been in the industry for a long time, so I've got a few tricks under my belt, as it were, but I guess I'll let you be the judges of this today. But perhaps an equally interesting question is, who are you and why are you here? Who comes to a presentation called How to Lie with Statistics? I mean, is it that you are actively trying to get better at lying? I mean, has Vegas never seen a greater set of dishonest people in one room? I don't know. I expect you're probably a bit like me. I know it's the first day, but you're into your analytics, but you figured it might be an opportunity to do something other than server administration, LOD calculations, whatever else has happened today. So, let's get into it and do a slightly more fun session. The talk was originally conceived by a couple of my US colleagues, and they were inspired by this book, How to Lie with Statistics. It's an old book, sort of 1950s, 1960s, I believe. And what I did was take the concepts from this book and bring it up to date with a few other texts, particularly around psychology, behavioral economics, and feel free to check them out on Amazon. They're fantastic texts. So here's the agenda. We're going to establish if there is actually a problem to be dealt with, and are people actually misusing the statistics. And after that, and I don't want to spoiler the first section, we'll begin to talk about the ways that people are lying with statistics. And then understand our individual responsibilities in this crazy world of numbers. Before I get into the meat of the content, let's just have a quick word on trust. Some professions are more trusted than others, i.e. we're more likely to believe what they say. For instance, based on UK data, at the bottom of these professions are politicians, government ministers, and weirdly enough footballers, or should I say soccer players. I don't quite know what soccer players have done to deserve this, but I wouldn't argue about the others. Soccer players have a habit of diving, people say, trying to convince the referees, I'm not sure. But interestingly, or at least for me, the average person would be trusted to tell the truth by 64% of other people, i.e. it's above 50%. Implying that we're actually pretty trusting as a species. And then finally, at the top of the list, we have professions such as nurses, doctors, teachers, professors, scientists. And I wonder what these professions have done to earn our trust, or perhaps more importantly, not lose it. Is it because they're more likely to use statistics? Yeah, possibly. But a more important point within the trusted professions, we expect expertise, we expect training, which gives them competency, relevancy, and reliability in a given domain. And that does actually tend to transfer over to a general level of trust in that individual. However, relevancy and context is really important. Would you trust the surgeon who had removed your appendix to drive you to work every day? Maybe, maybe not, but our brain doesn't always look at it that way. Unconsciously, we're happy to accept anybody's opinion who looks vaguely academic or authoritative. So hopefully, this will help me today. And for any of you psychologists out there, it's also a little nod to what they call the Milgram experiments. We'll see how it goes. You can research that later on when you go home. So, what is the problem? Is there a problem? What this presentation isn't about is having a go at badly presented data. For instance, this pie chart is not a lie. It's just terrible, okay? And this one's no better. It's a more recent one, and it's been produced by people who should know better. The YouGov organisation collects and distributes facts within the UK. They're one of the main bodies or organisations that do that. But look how they're trying to sort of tie the pizza theme with the visualisation and some terrible stats, and it all just adds up to be, just not right. But again, this really isn't what I'm after. What I'm really interested in is something like this. I don't know. Does anyone, I should say rather than everyone, know what this is? A couple of hands. Okay, cool. So this was a bus used 2 years ago in the UK in what was called the Brexit campaign. That has some statistics posted on the outside of it. In front of it is now our current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Who recognises him? Yeah? Yeah, we're good with Boris. Okay, cool. So it stated that if we'd save an awful lot of money, 350 million a week, by coming out of the EU, money that could be spent better on or spent alternatively on the NHS. That's our National Health Service, for those of you who are not familiar with it if you're not from the UK. And if you're not from the UK, it's worth knowing, even though we're going straight into an election now, a big, big deal, we're still really talking about Brexit a lot. And this 350 million figure is still being used, or despite being refuted by some of the most senior statisticians in the country. So, in an officially published letter, Sir David Norgreave, who's one of the chief statisticians, basically said it confuses things. It confuses net and gross contributions, and that's not very good, and it's a clear misuse of official statistics. But you know what? It doesn't matter. The figure is out there. Pandora's box has been opened. Everybody's, they just start using the number. And of course, you'd probably say this isn't new. Politicians are always making false claims. Okay, UK politicians. Obviously, I wouldn't want to cast aspersions about the US. But it's even had another update, not just in terms of the forthcoming election, but they actually took them to court and said, this is, they lied to us. Can we do something about this? Can we hold them up to contempt of court or whatever it might be? And actually, the leading judges in the UK have made it clear that false statements have always been a part of political campaigning, and that finding the truth in an objective sense might not always be possible. So we do have a problem. We have statistics being used, and a general system or administration accepting that not everything can be checked, certainly not within a timely manner. So that's the problem. Now, when we lie with stats, it's actually really easy to produce something, like the Brexit bus that's kind of close to the truth, but misleading. And as Asimov knew before, that the best lie can even be the truth itself if you just twist it that little bit. So what is a statistic? It's a fact or a piece of data obtained from a study of large quantity of numerical data. Okay, fine, great. But when thinking about statistics and lying, I find it useful to think about the different levels at which we process information. Here I've compared data processing with what is traditionally or accepted linguistic processing levels. And we can use figures and statistics at each level of this data processing hierarchy. I should warn you, I have too many S's in this presentation. Statistics, processing, whatever. So for instance, here's a statistic, 50. 50 what? We don't know. It's data, it's a statistic in its most basic form. It's like its rawest element. Here's a fuller statement. It's syntactically correct, as it were. 50% of X. It's a fully formed statement, but it's not really a lie. It can't be a lie because it's not grounded in anything at the moment. It's still just, it looks right, but it doesn't mean anything. So let's move on. Now let's see if we can come up with a piece of semantics or knowledge that can be disproved. Here is a picture of me, my brother, my biological sibling. We have the same mother and father, so we share genes. So here's the question for you guys. How much DNA do we share? Anyone? Give me a shout out. 100 was that? 50. 50, okay. Any advances on 50? Some, no, what was that, 30? 90, okay, interesting. So I'm going to take the first answer, because the first answer is actually the most commonly offered answer, 50%. It kind of makes sense. Same mother and father, we share our genes together. You know, it kind of splits out that on the whole we're likely to share about 50%. There you go, boom. And most scientists and people would agree with that as a concept, 50%. So it's kind of an undisputed fact at a semantic level. So here's the question. How does this fit in with the next statement? So scientists do believe that we share 90% of our DNA with chimps. Now my brother, I think it's the ears, to be honest. But there's no way I'm more related to this fella than him. And it gets worse. The same scientists would say that I share approximately 60% of my DNA with bananas. That's more than, we expect that I share with my brother. All of the statistics that I've put up there are factually correct. They're all true, but something's wrong. And in this case, I've used the phrase DNA in a very broad manner. And I've changed its context during the slides in order to slightly mislead or, just to make a point. Definitely getting close to what I call is a lie. You see, lies work at what I describe as the semantic and the pragmatic level. Semantically, something can be true or it can be false. Unfortunately, not all sort of facts or semantics can be easily disproved. It's unlikely that I'm ever going to prove to myself that the world is spherical. I just kind of accept it, right? But of course, some people don't believe that, and proving otherwise can be quite difficult. And that's the root of a good conspiracy theory. There's something that might make sense but cannot easily be disproved by the individual and their day-to-day lives. And it gets trickier. Pragmatically, things can be both true and false depending on the context. And being a good liar is all about distorting the context or making something hard to disprove. Adding the statistic just makes it more convincing, right? This sounds like we've actually taken some effort to, think about the lie. So I hope I've got you thinking. Maybe about the news stories you've read today or during the week or the stats that you've seen and you just haven't given them a second thought. So now I'm going to move on to talking about the tricks of the trade, how people use numbers to mislead you, and we'll start in the basic sort of Tableau home territory, visualizations. It's not our fault, right? As I say, we are all essentially cavemen and cavewomen. Now, Tableau's made a good name out of this because, we've evolved the ability to automatically spot differences in colour, shape, size, all these cues used to interpret information presented to us. And this was a great asset on the plains of Africa, okay? We've been able to spot things easily, patterns, outliers, etc. But it's a great asset when looking for data, but it also means it can be really, it means that the unconscious brain can begin to read things into a situation that it shouldn't, long before your conscious brain actually kicks in. because you're just seeing these patterns. These patterns might not actually be real. Oh, there we go. Here we go. So, take a look at a quick advert. Advertising is absolutely filled with all these kind of statistics, these lies, etc., etc. But I just pulled up a couple of simple ones for you today. The main thing this market wants you to know is that the car, the Werner, which we don't have in the UK, by the way, is number one in its segment. Look what the marketer has done. They've made sure, first of all, that the Werner is the brightest colour in the chart. It's the most eye-catching. We've got the gold medal winner already. And then we've given it another dimension. And that third dimension is there to hide the other slices, or in effect hide the other cars. Compare that to the chart on the left with the one on the right, and the marketer is literally shouting Werner versus the more considered representation on the right. I'm not actually I'm not a pie chart basher, but it's just clever the way they've used this to actually obscure most of the data. But it's not just marketers of car companies. Anybody know who this is? Okay. This is Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, presenting a beautiful chart relating to iPad sales. It was many conferences ago, okay? But Tim wanted everybody to know how well the iPad was doing. And look at it. It's beautiful. Sweeping from that sort of lower left to the top right. You know, it's bright blue at the beginning and slightly trailing off into the distance. Okay, kind of lovely swooshing kind of effect. Now let's have a look at it in more detail. I tried to do it in Tableau. Okay, it's a dull chart, I'll admit that. But there's two important points. The first one is, in order to get the right figure, I had to look at cumulative figure of sales. Now, cumulative charts always increase from left to right, by definition, okay? And the second point is, it's not quite as smooth and swooshy as Tim's. So let's have a look at the data in a bit more detail, the non-cumulative stuff. Much more interesting, much less swooshy, much more seasonal sales. And it's a mixed message, right? Okay, so let's give Tim a bit of leeway here. Let's see if we can get the graph to be a bit smoother. Let's add a moving average onto it. Not looking so good now. So it looks to me, after a good start with iPad sales, it began to level off and maybe even slow down. But of course, that's not what Tim showed. Tim kept the figures nice and positive, nice and beautiful for the Apple crowd. Now, some people say, well, that's just good marketing. And to be honest, I don't mind. I'm here to make a point. And the point is that the picture always wins. The unconscious brain interprets the picture first, and then the message gets imposed upon it. If you like these couple of examples, actually, I think there was a session earlier today. So once the video gets posted, I do recommend you go and have a look at Michael's session. He's got much more in-depth kind of lying with visualizations and how we get tricked. Certainly recommend that you look that up. So let's talk more about this wonderful brain of ours. Mythology, literature, psychology, they've always suggested that there's this kind of two players in the brain, the conscious and the unconscious. In around about the 70s, some sort of econometricians, psychologists, they were there were two guys, Dan Kahneman and Dan Ariely, and they made a series of ingenious experiments splitting our decision-making into what they described as System 1 and System 2. Kind of an we always knew or felt about the human brain anyway. But some of the experiments they did were really, really clever. And what they began to show was that System 1, i.e. the caveman within us, is basically, our inner chimp. It's the bit of brain that we've been using for the past 100,000 years. Calling it a caveman does it some injustice. It's actually extremely smart. It's the part of the brain that makes really quick decisions, and it's that part of the brain that's going to stop you from getting eaten by a lion or a tiger. Not so many of them around, but it's still there, right? And it's still on the lookout for worries, disasters, stresses, etc. System 2 is the slower side. It's the capabilities for sort of more logical, conscious thinking, and we only use it when we've got time to think, when we're relaxed and when we're engaged in the subject matter. And what the two Dans found out was broadly that the majority of the time, System 1 is in control. It's actually influencing the way we interpret the world around us, particularly in times of anxiety. Chemicals like adrenaline, cortisol, etc., they're pumped into the bloodstream and actually inhibit System 2 thinking, which is why it can be quite hard to concentrate when you're stressed. The body kind of is getting itself ready for a fight or flight response, and the last thing it needs is to be forced to think logically about things. Now this moves on to like a sort of a popular topic in sort of modern scientific literature at the moment, and that is discussions around biases and working on the idea that we do an awful lot of things autonomously in this System 1 manner. So let's move on to biases. The System 1 appears when we're making these kind of irrational decisions. And you've probably heard about biases in the media. It's a very popular topic. I've studied them for many years when I was at university and subsequently in business. And knowing about them helps. It helps you from your day-to-day life. But the weird thing is, they're curious, but they're also contradictory in many ways. So what I thought I'd do is just introduce a couple of them. Maybe some of you have heard them before, maybe you haven't, but it's nice to understand that there's a lot of kind of unconscious processing going on there. Anchoring is one of my favorites. It's very simple. Looking at one number can somehow affect how we interpret the second subsequent number. And the key thing is that the second number is usually something we're unsure about, but we need to make a judgment on. i.e. we can't easily use our System 2 thinking. So something that System 1 just goes, sees one thing and then moves to make an assumption. Now marketers know that we sometimes struggle with how much to spend. And when it comes to a scenario like Father's Day, when a wife or a child goes out shopping for their beloved father, they might start thinking, we're just going to spend $50 on a razor. They don't know how much razors cost, right? That's the uncertain bit in their mind. So what do our websites do? When I searched for shavers at Boots, admittedly I haven't shaved for a little bit, but when I searched for shavers at Boots, a big UK retailer, the results were sorted by apparently best match. Now it just so happens, conveniently, that best match shows me the most expensive razors, the ones that retail at £300. So where's the anchoring? Okay. Well, what happens is the customer ends up spending more on average. More than that original £50, $50 that they intended originally, particularly when Daddy's been so good and deserves it. Okay? It's not that they buy the 300, it just raises the amount that they're likely to spend. And just have a quick think about like the last time you bought something when you walked out the shop and you suffered that thing called buyer's remorse, where you paid too much for it. And you suddenly thought, why did I do that? What's just happened? And what is happening is it's your System 1 going through the purchase, making it happen, and then your System 2 sort of finally kicking in where you're going, oh, okay, that purchase is done. Oh, what the heck? That's what's happening, okay? So my second favourite, or easiest to understand, is framing. How we present a figure, a statistics, or a probability can have a great impact about how people feel, whether they choose to act on that piece of information or not. So for instance, we've got a couple of harmless examples here, presented in a very positive frame. Product has been proven effective in 80% cases. There's 75% lean meat, etc., etc. Our Caveman System 1 loves this. There's no tigers here, right? No stress. This is happy. Everything's nice. Now let's look at the same figures presented in a different way. Have a think about these different statements. Have a think about how they make you feel. They're exactly the same figures, but presented in a different way. I mean, these are just light-hearted examples, but even with these, I bet you prefer the statements on the left. We can get into a more sort of serious area if you've had an operation recently, or you've been to the doctors about something that's relatively serious. Think about the language that the doctors and the nurses use when they're discussing whether you should go under the knife or whether you should receive a certain treatment or not. If a caveman, System 1, senses a threat, particularly that we might lose something, it gets ready to stimulate the fight or flight response and shuts down System 2. Okay, it just releases adrenaline and the language that gets used in those situations becomes so important. If you want to know more about the kind of impact that this particular bias could have, I recommend reading Nudge. It's a great book. It's an exploration of the impact that kind of framing of the language of the statistics can use to affect people's decision making. So getting on to the next bit, right? This is the fun bit. Well, we'll see. Your turn to engage with some figures. Are you ready, guys, girls, everybody? Can I hear you? Okay, cool. So, question 1. The Linda problem. This is a classic psychology experimental question that I've taken word for word from, I think, the 1980s. I'm going to make 2 statements to you about Linda. And I want you to make a snap judgment. I want you to quickly decide on which is more likely. So Linda is 31 years old. She's single, outspoken, very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination, social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Shows you it was the 80s. Which is more probable? That Linda is a bank teller? Or that Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? So which is more likely? Number 1, Linda is a bank teller? Cool. Number 2, Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? Cool. Okay, good. Thank you for participating. It's quite interesting because actually the split of the room isn't the traditional thing. It's actually used about 80% of people get this wrong. The correct answer is actually number 1. Maybe you got this right. Maybe it's because you've seen it before. Even if you didn't, even if you had seen it before and you understand why it's number 1, you will have been fighting your inner caveman who wants to connect its preconceived notions of what it's been asked. And it wants to jump to the answer. It wants to not think about something. System 2 will tell you that option 2 is a subset of option 1. It can't actually be more likely. It has to be equal or less because it's a subset. But system 1 wants you to make that decision. You know, it's, it sees a connection. Let's do it. Okay. Now, it might not seem that obvious, but this kind of Linda problem affects AI, as does a number of the other biases that I can get into. But when the likes of somebody like Amazon builds its facial recognition software for recognizing people from arrest photos, it fails to take into account how those similar faces could be just everybody else in the population. I.e., the software generates loads of false positives because they dramatically weighted the likelihood of the match being an offender and failed to take into account the base rate of criminals in the world. So that something might work well in the sort of criminal justice world or the criminal labs, it just looks humorously crazy when it's suddenly put into a sort of a broader context. Remember that word? It's changed its context. Rather than being, assessed in the, in the jails or the, like I say, the criminal justice system. So question number 2. This is where I'm going to need some of you to shout out in a bit. I have a rule in my head, okay? And you have to guess what it is. These 3 numbers obey my rule. 2, 4, and 8. So I want you to guess the rule, but the way you're going to guess it, I want you to shout out 3 numbers that you think match my rule, and then tell me what you think the rule is. So go. Somebody give me 3 numbers. 16, 32, 64. That matches my rule. What is the rule? Yeah, it's not the rule. 1, 2, 4. That matches the rule. What's the rule? No, that's not it. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that matches the rule. Not right. Next. Oh, interesting. They're all less than 10, so give me, give me 3 numbers. Well, that's not less than 10. Okay. Right. The rule was increasing numbers, okay? But you probably saw another pattern, and you tried to follow it. You didn't try and disprove it. And the reality is you've got to ask the right questions of the data if you're going to use the data to go forwards. We don't do a lot of sort of disproving when we're thinking about these kind of patterns. We just go, oh yeah, got the pattern, let's go. So those just two brief tests, sort of the Linda problem and that problem, they reveal that our decision making reveal some things about decision making and how biases might exist. And they include things like the confirmation bias, the conjunction fallacy, framing, ignorance of the base rate. They're all in there. Sort of summarised by I find that a lot of them pulled together, particularly the kind of confirmation bias, it kind of holds us back in our business decision making and life in general. Because it's so easy to see in others, what they're doing wrong, but it's actually really hard to disprove what we know, okay, and think about objectively what we do and don't know. Because we just don't look to try and disprove what we believe to be true. So, moving on, let's try a few calculations. Away from the psychology, let's get our caveman to start seeing how good they are with maths, okay? Let's face it, cavemen aren't really mathematicians, but let's see. So, I expect we all know what the mean median is, okay? So, but a quick recap. Well, actually I got mode up there as well. So the mode is the most common item in the data set. The mean is usually what we call the arithmetic mean, i.e. it's everything, or the total of everything divided by, the number of records and the number of observations you've got. And then the median is the midpoint of the data, i.e. if you lined all the data up from, in some kind of rank, from like smallest to biggest, the median is the bit that's in the middle. Okay? Now the caveman tends to understand the normal distribution. There's a lot of things in the middle, but not so much as at the edges. That's cool. But it takes our system 2 to actually start thinking about skewed data, which frankly is much more common. Quick example would be how well we drive, okay? If I could measure how good we are all at driving, if I could put you on a scale from 1 to 10, I'd probably find it's normally distributed. There's some of you that are really good, some of you that are really bad, but most of us are somewhere in the middle. However, this is very different when I ask you how well you think you drive. So can I ask you to put your hands up in the air if you think you are worse than the average person at driving? Okay, so for the tape, the microphone, we do actually have some hands up, so I thank you. At least we've got some honest people in this dishonest crowd, okay? But that is a fundamental problem of data collection and dealing with human data. This is how we get skewed distributions. The chances are 50% of you are below average. You're not going to admit to it though, are you? Not in public anyway. And it takes the system 2 thinking, it takes your Einstein to appreciate why there's a difference in the distribution. Okay, so then you get this kind of skewedness. We get data that looks a bit different to normally distributed data, and we have to try and deal with that somehow. Okay, moving on. So let's quickly explore the difference between mean and median and how they can be used to mislead. The median is absolutely great for hiding inequality. And the mean is great for making things seem better or worse if you do have inequality in the data. So, quick example. Let's imagine we have all the salaries of everybody in the room. For the sake of arguing, just pick a number. Let's say everybody earns, on average, 40k. And the median's going to be pretty similar because we're normally distributed. No problems. Now imagine if we had these two gentlemen join us today. Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, two of Seattle's extremely rich men. The median remains the same, okay? Because we've just had two more people, it might have shifted a little bit to the side, but it's more or less the same. Whereas the mean moves to some kind of massive figure, billions and billions of dollars on average, okay? This semantically is the truth. But pragmatically, is it the truth? Does that caveman or woman actually believe that? That we all earn the amount of like a third world country? Not likely. Okay. Question number 3. What should we get to? Okay, so whilst we're talking about salaries, here's another quick question. What is the increase in salary over the 2 periods of plus 100%, minus 50%? Got 3 options. Okay, who thinks it's 50? Who thinks it's 25? Who thinks it's 0? Yeah, okay. The answer is 0. But some of you may have had to think about it. Again, I don't mind that actually you got it right, but it is an example that actually a lot of people fall for, or at least it's something to be aware of. We're not very good at using percentages, or in order to calculate the final amount, we've got to compare or use a calculation earlier on. And we don't necessarily tie things together very well. We don't evaluate everything well together, similar to the Linda problem. So it's something that the Caveman really struggles with. And Cavemen on the whole aren't very good at working with percentages anyway. So, you did very well. I'm very proud of you, okay? Gold star. Question number 4. Knowing what statistically is very important. Here's a sample sizes. We have a large hospital that has around 45 babies delivered every day. We have a small hospital where there's around 15 babies delivered every day. For a period of a year, each hospital recorded the days on which there were 60% of the babies, let me phrase it, they recorded the days on which more than 60% of the babies born were boys. Which hospital do you think it's likely to be? So, hands up who thinks it's the larger hospital. Hands up who thinks it's the smaller hospital. Hands up who thinks it's about the same, or at least kind of within 5% of each other. Okay. You're a good crowd. You're pretty sharp today. I don't know what I must have caught you too early in the conference. You're not quite worn out and tired. Okay, so the result is the smaller hospital. Some of you, but not many of you, might need to think about why that is, but it's all to do with how we understand how randomness occurs. And in this case, you're more likely to see more random figures or things that deviate from the norm in a smaller sample. It's just more likely to happen. Worth knowing when you're in Vegas and there's a whole load of slot machines and, blackjack tables and everything else out there. But randomness really does play like a massive role in our lives. And I could probably I'd like to do a whole session on randomness, but it wouldn't sell many Tableau licenses. We do, however, get fooled by randomness a lot. Wonderful book. Suggest you go and read it. Another great reference for sort of just getting a feel for how foolish we can be in many situations. So let's move on to the end of this section, data collection. Just check my timings. Okay, still good. So now I've already discussed bad data collection with my bad driver example before. But actually, I find the easiest way to discuss some of these problems of data collection is pick something we understand, that we all can identify with or intuitively talk about. Surveys and sports, it's the easiest thing to do. Hopefully you can all get on board with this. Have we got any NFL fans in the house? Okay, cool. Anybody know who this is? Yeah, there you go. I didn't know. I'm sorry, I'm English. We don't know these things. So this is Bill Belichick, and he's the coach of the New England Patriots, who are the current Super Bowl champions. I'm right, yeah? Okay. Now imagine at some point during the Super Bowl, he had a crisis in confidence. He's there on the side, and he didn't know what to do next. Imagine he could stop time. Maybe he's that powerful, I don't know. Send out a survey asking people what they thought should be his next play. The most important question is actually who should he send the question to? Because he could send it to his offensive or defensive coaches. He could send it to the players who are on the pitch, or maybe the players who are off the pitch, who haven't got a game yet. He could send it to the entire team. He could send it to the Patriot fans, or even the commentators, or perhaps the Rams fans who are the opposition. Now, some of these options are certainly more sensible than others. But the challenge for you is whether you think he's going to get a good and honest answer from all these people. Each person taking the survey is going to have their own motives, and they don't necessarily have the capabilities to offer Bill any good advice. So, just take a minute and ask yourself, who should he really send this survey to? And it's not as easy as you think. And yet we face this challenge all the time with the kinds of data we collect. How did we collect it? Who collected it? Why did they collect it? What's the likely bias that's actually within that survey? And it gets further. I know we're just talking about surveys, but maybe he wanted to add a few additional questions about his quarterback, Tom Brady. I had to look up that one as well, sorry. The way he phrases his questions can have a massive impact on the responses he receives. Due to the many biases that we've already discussed, you could end up with a misleading data set. So, is he too old? It's a leading question. I found out he had a weird diet. I did a bit of research. Where does he enjoy drinking beer? It's a loaded question. Or you could even just confuse the person taking the survey by putting some weird random jargon within it. And this is just the surface, okay? Data collection is, whether there's humans involved, whether it be survey data or customer data or purchase data, whatever it is, there's always different incentives out there. There's always reasons why it doesn't look right. You've got to think about these things. And once you've got the data, what about the correlations? The more data you collect, the more likely you have meaningless correlations, or ones that don't make sense. So, for example, ice cream. Ice cream eating is correlated with shark attacks. Is it that shark attacks are attracted to people eating raspberry ripples? No, they're both correlated with warm weather. But the data doesn't show that. This is usually the time when a presenter like myself puts into big letters, correlation doesn't equal causation. But correlation, if it doesn't equal causation, then what does? I mean, it's a frustrating phrase. Correlations basically happen all the time, often for no reason other than pure chance, and causation is actually a really hard thing to prove. What you have to do is ask yourself, does this correlation make sense? Instead of getting excited, you've got to ask yourself, is it right? Can I prove the connection? Should I use this information or should I eliminate it from my next piece of analysis? In trying to prove the causation, you have to work on the assumption that there might be something else connecting the two things together. And you have to go looking for it, ruling out results that are probably just, random effects as you go. You don't stop looking just because you've found something. As George Box once said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is something lost on a lot of analysts and indeed data scientists who mistake validity for usefulness. An accurate model is not automatically a good one. We should always be questioning the numbers in front of us and how they're produced, whether we can use them, and particularly how we disprove them. Going back to the issue of trust, we can always trust the medics and the scientists, can't we? Yeah, of course we can. Here's a story that made the Daily Express, the Huffington Post, the Daily Mail, the Daily Star, all widely read newspapers in the UK. You can eat chocolate and lose weight. Isn't that just the best story? Yeah? Fantastic. I mean, we all like chocolate, of course. It's fantastic. So, imagine a world where you could get slimmer by eating chocolate. I know I like the sound of it, but this is a fake story. It's a misleading article designed to grab headlines. It was collected with the intention of building a fake and actually demonstrating how easy it is to get it out there in the world. So a journalist with no nutritional sort of qualifications whatsoever, he engaged a PhD to build the scam, to prove how bad things are in the current media. They ran a quick survey with many biases in the data collection. It was collecting all sorts of information about the volunteers, their weight, their blood pressure, their height. They were just looking for random correlations. They knew if they could get something, they might be able to make a news story out of it. And guess what? They found the correlation between chocolate and weight loss. They'd struck media gold. From here, it is a simple job of just sending it to dozens of publications and institutes eager to pick the story up. This isn't to say that everything you see in the media is wrong, but it does go back to the beginning of the presentation. Who do you trust and why? And does it sound too good to be true? And similarly, thinking or speaking of bad science, because, like I say, they're not necessarily immune to bad use of statistics. Many more serious cases than I wanted to present in this jovial side. Feel free to take a look into Bad Science by Ben Goldacre, another great book. So where do we go from here? How do we get figures that we can believe in? What does a data-driven org look like? I mean, is it an org or organization that has loads of data? Is it one that's got loads of governed reports? Is it one that has a secure environment with amazing ETL and loads of cleaning? Is it one that is implementing the most recent AI tools or machine learning? Is it an org that's continually finding ways to, I don't know, import the same old data? Now, Gartner, who happen to love a random statistic, and we all like listening to Gartner, they offer some general good management advice. But, I mean, look at these bullets. They could be talking about anything, not just, data-drivenness. It could be product design, it could be sales process, it could be anything at all. It's just way too broad. I mean, spark ambition, align responsibilities. It's not helpful when it actually comes to building an organization. Just like the story about the chocolate, most data-driven organizations work like this. They're driven by the narrative of the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, the big voices within the organization. You have a story and you need to go out and find the data that supports it. Even the data scientists in the room, and anybody in the data space since the 80s will tell you, will have a slightly different story. They'll say, look, just assemble your data. We'll find you the truth. There's going to be truth there. We'll just collect it and it'll be all fine. But due to everything we've mentioned, data collection, lack of context, misunderstanding, it leaves these systems prone to biases that we might not be aware of. Even if we build smart new AI capabilities, it will be weak and brittle, and often too opaque for us to understand what's happening, making us potentially temporarily better, but actually less agile and weaker in the long run because we don't really understand what's going on or the challenges that we really face. So a data-driven org could mean trying to automate everything. If you're just operationally talking about it, you just have data that flows from one pipeline to another. But there's no companies I know that don't need humans to make some decisions at some level. And in my opinion, a company can only become data-driven or data-informed by having everybody in the organization ask the following, which is, what do we think we know? How can we disprove? And how do we learn more about whatever it is that we're looking at? And it has to be done all in the context of the broader company strategy. Pragmatically working out what we think we know and what we don't know, and being humble enough that we, to admit that we're not perhaps the experts that we think we are, is the way forward. That's the way to becoming data-driven. Now, so where should we be using statistics? Well, very quickly, let's just take a quick look at the scientific method. Even though there can be bad science out there, okay, what institutions do well, and they do really well, scientific institutions this is they democratize the data, okay? They publish the results. They create references for other people to check and review. I mean, that's what they do. They create communities of reviewers, as it were. Science is not driven by the statistics or the data, but by the human mind trying to make sense of the surroundings and deploy smart and simple techniques just to challenge the theories of the day. And the statistics are just the viewpoint or the model of which the data holds, not necessarily the truth in themselves. But having as many people as possible think about the issue to hand and try to disprove the accepted wisdom is the most valuable thing, in my opinion. And this is where we can see the Tableau impact supporting this process. So, it's about being able to share the visualizations and dashboards. It's not just about the narrative. It's about getting as many people as possible to see the problems that you as many as you can. It's about using the right data sources and uncovering errors within them. And it isn't about using that magic algorithm, it's about eyeballs. It's about getting people on the data because they're the ones who will spot the human errors in the human issues in the data. It's about using automatic recommendations that are essentially reflecting community usage. i.e. it's not a vague measure of quality of content, it's actually wisdom of the crowds. Building trust is important, as is providing context to the data that you're looking at. And having experts certify the data in your business context. It's also about having one throat to choke when you find some problems and inconsistencies. I mean, data is very rarely perfect, never mind about grey and Brits. The fact is that if you've got 100 or 1,000 eyeballs looking at a data point, they will find the errors for you. I'm not saying you should release bad things, but I'm just saying they will sort of smooth it out. They'll actually pick up those things that can't possibly be found by just one individual. It's about giving the users the ability to drill into their data and ask the questions they've not yet considered. It's about giving them the ability to question, challenge, comment what they see in front of them. And you may find that you have, those hidden Einsteins within your company. And of course, we now have explained data, which It finds out why marks of data can be differentiated from the rest of data. It's amazing. However, the most amazing thing about it is not the clever stats behind it. It's this button. This button means you get to question what gets found. You can challenge the results. You can use the output in a further bit of analysis. It allows the user to be data informed. This button supports the analytic process and is the right way to uncover wisdom in your organization. And analytics is about answering those questions. What do we really know? What has changed? So in summary, we are the problem, not the statistics. Our brain doesn't want to have to think about things. It's happy to go with the flow of the caveman. What we have to do is acknowledge this and wake up when we're interpreting the numbers. We have to add context and references to the numbers that we produce for other people. We have to show our working out, like they used to tell us at school, so that others can actively challenge us and make sense of the information that we have. We've also learned that if you want to use statistics to lie, it's worryingly easy. The most important thing is to put the statistic in a different context. But there's many other things that we've discussed here today. All sorts of things. But if all else fails, you quite simply need to dress up in a doctor's coat. I hope today has left you with some insight into our decision making. I'm asking you to acknowledge you're in a caveman and woman, and be curious about the things that you see. And I'm always asking, why is it here? Does it make sense? How can I disprove it? And one final message, always be on your guard. You never know when you might need system 2. Let me tell you that there's been hundreds of thousands of people who love Tableau. They come to our conferences every year. And now let me ask you to fill in a survey for the session. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Vegas. It's been a pleasure.